welcome back. We are on chapter 3 of War Brothers. The chapter is called Oteka. The limbs of the night commuters were stiff, and the chill from the ground had to be shaken from their bones. But as soon as their eyes opened, the children were up and walking. Oteka, especially, had good reason to leave Gulu quickly and walk the 10 kilometers back to the camp where he now lived. The medicine man had said that it would cost 100,000 shillings to have his question answered. The two 5,000 shilling notes that were folded tightly in his hand, added to the 90,000 shillings he had hidden in his hut, would at last be enough. Begging, selling, working, it had taken him almost a year to collect this princely sum. Pink-headed and pink-tailed lizards skittered back and forth across the dusty road. Oteka paid them no mind as his walk turned into a jog, and then into a slow run. The morning sun had turned the air a buttery yellow, and the red road underfoot was dry. Soon the rains would come, and the road would become a ruby river. Every kilometer or so, the white man's motoka honked, and Oteka had to pitch himself into the tall grass by the roadside to avoid being hit. These jeeps carried the munu to and from the Murchison Falls Game Reserve 100 kilometers down this same road. Hippos and crocodiles, lions and leopards, giraffes and birds of all sorts lived on the reserve. Oteka knew all about the park. His grandfather had been a guide to white hunters many years ago when it was still possible to hunt great game. Oteka would have liked to see a lion just once. The hum of the camp was welcoming as he approached, a morning song of blended voices, of women greeting the day and each other, of roosters crowing and babies wailing. Oteka, Oteka! An old woman sitting on the kolo outside her mud and cow dung halt called to him. Oteka crouched down and smiled into the old woman's milky eyes. Ada, I am back. It might have been a silly thing to say. After all, he was right in front of her, but Ada's eyesight was failing. Besides, it was their custom to greet each other this way. Oteka had no family, and Ada had no family, so they had become each other's family, the 15-year-old boy and the 70-year-old woman. What happened to your family? Oteka had once asked Ada that question, but she could not respond. She could not speak the names of her son and his family for fear of crying. So it was another woman, an old friend of Ada's from the same village, who had shared Ada's story with him. Ada had once lived with her son, her daughter-in-law, and their 3 children on a small farm. To see a son well married and prosperous, and her grandchildren strong and healthy, it was a good life. Ada was a gifted weaver and could support herself and take care of her grandchildren while her daughter-in-law tended to the garden. They grew maize, cassava, and vegetables of all kinds. Her son took care of the chickens, pigs, and goats, and they had enough money to send the 2 oldest boys to school. Such blessings she had. Many in the village envied her, said Ada's old friend. Perhaps someone put a curse on her, someone who was jealous, because one night the LRA descended. There was screaming and rounds of bullets made of silver streaks There was screaming and rounds of bullets made silver streaks in the night sky. There were long, sharp knives, too. The old friend paused. We heard the screams. Later, it was said that Ada's son and daughter-in-law fought off the LRA with their bare hands while Ada sheltered the children with her body. The screaming stopped suddenly, and Ada was cast aside like rubbish, not even worthy of killing. All 3 children were taken by the LRA, along with the goats, the chickens, and the food stored up for the rainy season. Everything was gone. Ada was left alone with her dead son and daughter-in-law. The story made Oteka shake with anger, and he had promised himself right then and there that he would not leave her. How could he, when she reminded him so much of his own grandmother? Oteka, too, remembered what happiness felt like, what it meant to be safe, to have a future, to have a family. You will go to the university and become a doctor. His father would repeat these words often as he rubbed his son's head. Perhaps I will drive a truck like you, suggested Oteka. That may be, nodded his father. We do share a gift, my son. We always know the right path to take. On a continent with few road signs, having a keen sense of direction was a true blessing. and you will play football. Father threw up his hands and laughed. His father was very smart, spoke 5 languages, and drove trucks for a big company in Kampala. The money was good, but it took him away from home for weeks, sometimes months on end. Oteka's mother was tall and slim and could read and write. She did not hit her children, which caused the neighbors to say that her children would misbehave and grow up crooked. They were a small family, just Oteka, the oldest, Osira, only 4 years old, and baby Esther. They had 4 cows, a goat, a dozen hens, and one rooster, which crowed mid-afternoon and sometimes in the middle of the night. Once, after having been woken from sleep once too often, Mother went after the rooster with a knife. She chased him around and around. He was old but slippery. Oteka begged his mother to spare the old rooster, but it was hard to beg and laugh at the same time. In the end, the rooster lived to wake them up another night. Their farm was a tropical garden of banana, mango palm, and tamarind trees, and coffee trees too. Oteka loved it best when the flowers on the coffee tree were in bloom and cool air blew through their leaves. The grass was long, and the stream that ran through their farm was clean. Collecting the water from the village well was his job. Even as a small boy, Oteka hauled 2 buckets every day, one for washing and the other for cooking. Water was used sparingly. They ate twice a day, although, like everyone else in the village, only once a day during the dry season. Oteka went to school. He had many friends. He had sandals. They lived in paradise. Then one day his father came home from his travels a sick man. His sickness was called tujonyo, or kasepi, or kilim, the slimming disease. It had many names. A white nurse who came to the village to give needles called his father's disease AIDS. She was not kind or sympathetic. After a few months, father's eyes began to bulge, his cheekbones stood out, and diarrhea ran down his legs like brown water dribbling out of a rusted pipe. Father went to the foreign doctors for a cure. When they had none, mother called in the medicine man. Father disapproved of witchcraft. I have been to many countries in my truck, to Botswana, Somalia, Rwanda, and South Africa, and all these places in between. Witchcraft is false. Accept the Christian God and his stone saints as the big God, said his father. The whole family walked to church twice a week. It was far away, and it took hours to reach it. Mother was Catholic too, and so she went to the medicine man only when the big God did not help, only when necessary. When father became too sick to walk to church, she felt that it was necessary. The medicine man came and used his jogi and a spear to find the poison around the home, but father did not get well. A second medicine man said that the house was cursed, and many hens, goats, and even a cow had to be sacrificed. A third medicine man, Sidilajok, a witch doctor with great and evil powers, had put a curse on father for having 4 cows, a goat, and chickens. Mother sold the cows and the goat and used much of the money to pay for the medicine man. Then she walked many kilometers to church almost every day and put more notes and coins into the box. She prayed to the big God until her knees, her legs, and her back were so stiff and sore it was hard to stand. One day, an auntie came and offered to care for the children. She looked each child up and down through narrow, nut-hard eyes. Oteka was too big, she said, and baby Esther was too small. She picked Osira. Auntie lived near the Sudanese border. The Lord's resistance army was near. It was dangerous, but Auntie said not to worry about abduction. It was better Osira lived away from Tuujonyo aids. Auntie took Osira's hand and left. Mother cried, "Soon we will be together again." Father died. The priest would not come to give him funeral rites. He had a big jeep, but said that traveling to their village was too dangerous. The LRA were in the area. The men of their village would not bury his father. Don't touch, the disease might spread," they whispered to one another. Never mind that tradition told them that those who denied anyone a proper burial would be haunted until the day they too died. Never mind those who shirked their duty risked offending the gods. An uncle took pity on Oteka and, using a dry wooden pole, pushed the body of his father into the grave. Dry wood, he said, would not transmit the disease. His father's body was wrapped up in gunny sack. There was a thud and a gust of dust as his father's body fell into the hole. "Father," Oteka whispered above his grave, "forgive me." Then Oteka hid behind their hut and cried. His father was buried in a field far away. The elders of the village decided that father's grave could not be near their huts, where the disease could worm its way up through the soil. Without his father's grave nearby, Oteka would not feel his father's fortifying presence and would not benefit from his father's goodwill and strength. When Oteka's baby sister, Esther, died of Tuujanio AIDS, Oteka alone buried her. As his beautiful mother grew weaker and weaker, it was Oteka who bathed her and dripped water into her parched tongue. People remarked, "He has a strong spirit." They admired him, but they would not go near him or his mother. Then a man from Auntie's village arrived. He said that 4-year-old Osira had died of malaria. The news left Oteka breathless. "Osira, Osira, my brother," he cried. But Oteka had no time to think, no time to grieve. When dirt fell over his mother's wasted body, he pleaded with any god that would listen, big or small. "Do not leave me here alone. Take me too." But he was strong, and so he lived. Oteka stayed with his grandmother until he was 14 years old, but then a year ago, before the rains, she too had died. And so Oteka and Ada adopted one another, with each doing what they could for the other. Ada was too old now and too blind to do the cooking, although she prepared the vegetables. Oteka did the grinding of the corn and most of the cooking. The other boys laughed at him for doing woman's work, but he shrugged them off. Oteka cooked cassava and sweet potatoes, steamed the maize, and Dodo harvested from the garden. Sometimes they ate pumpkin mixed with shelled ground nuts, but mostly they ate cassava. Other times they ate the mush the people from the United Nations doled out in great bleached bags with blue stripes down the side. Occasionally the woman in the camp took pity and invited them to share in a tasty meal of rat, boiled, rolled in nuts, and baked over an open fire. In return, Oteka became an expert at preparing chickens to cook. A chop to the neck to kill them, drain the blood, dip the chicken in boiling water, and pluck it while still warm to remove the giblets. Despite all his skill in finding and preparing food, Oteka was always hungry. But his belly was not bloated, and the tips of his hair had not turned to rust. These were sure signs of malnutrition. He was healthy enough. But daily life, the gardening, preparing the food, the cooking, it took time, time not spent learning, time not spent in school. He would not be a doctor as his father had hoped. "I have enough money now, Ada." Oteka grinned as he held out his hand to show her the notes. "It is good that now you have what you need." She smiled. Not for the first time, Ada gazed at the boy through foggy eyes and admired him. He was a tall boy, so good-looking. He reminded her of her own son, and that thought caused her as much pain as happiness. "Sit for a moment." Ada patted the ground in front of her. Oteka took in a breath. As much as he cared for her, he had no time to listen to an old woman's ramblings. Still, out of respect, he sat. "All Acholi names have meanings. This you know. Do you know the meaning of the name your parents gave you?" Ada's old eyes narrowed. "It means hero." Oteka stared at the ground. He was embarrassed. He was no hero. "That is true. It also means victory. You can tell by the name they gave you that your parents had great hopes for you, and so do I. Soon you'll be off in search of your own path." "I will not leave you here, Ada." Oteka made the promise and meant it. "Soon I will join my family in the world beyond reach. But listen carefully, Oteka. When I am in the world that cannot be touched, I will reach back and protect you with all my might. You see me now as old and weak, but inside I am young and strong. That is how it is with all people, no matter where they live, no matter where they come from. Now I ask you, do you believe in the medicine man, my son?" Oteka nodded his head, but not vigorously, not with commitment. The old woman paused, then reached out and gently ran her withered hands over his arms. "You see these arms? They are strong, strong like the limbs of the great Owi tree. Why have you reached such a height? Surely you are this tall and straight so that you may one day touch the clouds. But to be tall and rigid means you must one day break. Like the great Owi tree, you too must learn to bend and sway in the wind. And look at these arms. One day, these strong arms will turn into wings and take you up to the big God. And see these feet? Look at how they carry you. Look at how swift you are, how powerful. Like the roots of the mighty Owi tree, these feet are your roots, and your roots are your culture, and your culture is witchcraft. Go, my son, go and ask the medicine man your question." The old woman smiled as he leapt up and charged into his own hut, ducking his head, but still clipping the straw that hung down from the thatched roof. Oteka's mud hut was cool and welcoming. A place was carved out for everything he owned. There was a rag ball made of plastic garbage bags and bits of twine, and a second shirt from the UN charity bags with the words Mont Tremblant embossed on the pocket. That's in Quebec. He had a scratchy blanket with UN stamped on the top and an old towel with the words Lion King sprawled across it. Oteka flipped back the mat on the floor, then dug up a metal box hidden in a hole. It had belonged to his mother, and he counted out the 90,000 shillings and added the new 10,000 shillings he would use to buy a white hen. The medicine man might yet ask for a sheep or even a goat, which made him nervous. Oteka could afford neither. "I'll be back, Ada." Oteka laughed as he ran past her. The old woman lifted a heavy hand, smiled, then looked up at the sun and wondered why it had grown so dark so early in the day. It took less than 10 minutes to negotiate with a farmer for the white hen. It took another 10 minutes to race across the camp. Thousands now lived in the displacement camp. Many families starved, yet they could see their farms from this distance, their very own land and homes. And yet, lurking about, often between them and their land, was Coney and his band of child soldiers. Oteka ran past the bamboo shower stalls and communal kitchens. The smell of cooking palm oil was in the air. He raced past the woman pounding cassava into flour and around an old storyteller who was welcoming home straggling night commuters. Even now, tired from their walk and with no food in their bellies, the older children were rushing to the schoolroom run by the United Nations. The women were off tending to the gardens, young and old men setting up chessboards, some on spindly tables, others on mats on the ground. In the distance, he could see the hospital, a stark cement building that harbored a dozen iron beds, paper-thin mattresses, and a lone medical assistant in a white lab coat. Beside it, and down a small hill, were the latrines. Out of breath, Oteka came to a sudden stop several meters away from the medicine man's hut. He calmed himself, inhaled deeply, and walked towards the medicine man with all due reverence and respect. The medicine man, a man of 50 years, or more, with a shriveled belly and tangled hair and 6 teeth, 3 up, 3 down, sat cross-legged on a mat in front of his hut. Life in the camp had reduced his weight and his fortunes considerably, but he still sat with a regal bearing and surveyed the world around him. As Oteka approached, the medicine man took note of the white hen as he looked Oteka up and down. "Medicine man," Oteka bowed respectfully, "I need to talk to my mother." Chapter 4, Medicine Man. "Do you have the money?" The medicine man's piercing eyes made Oteka squirm. Oteka laid the notes, and a few coins too, out on the mat. The medicine man nodded. In better times, he would have considered such a sum beneath him, but now, it was enough. "I see the white hen, but what of the goat or sheep? The small gods must be appeased." "This is all I have." Oteka bowed again. His heart began to pound. To save the money to buy a sheep or a goat would take a long time, too long. "And what of your father, your brothers and sisters and cousins? Can they not help you?" "I am alone." Oteka looked at the ground. He was ashamed. "Then I ask you, do you believe?" "Yes." The word came out in a whisper. Did he? He was a Christian. But if there was a chance, even a small one, then surely the big God would understand. And besides, did not the big God create everything? He must have created the medicine man too. And might the big God speak through one of his own creations? Such was Oteka's reasoning. After scratching various parts of his body, pondering and considering, and raising his eyes to the heavens, the medicine man nodded. "I cannot guarantee that the small gods will help with such a humble sacrifice, but they may take pity on a boy who has no family. It depends. The gods can be stubborn, but—" The medicine man held up one spindly finger. "We can try. Wait here." Oteka leapt into the air with gratitude. The medicine man's first and second wives had already left to work in the gardens. It was the third, youngest wife who would assist. She was only a few years older than Oteka, but seemed sure of her duties. With a careless wave, she plucked the squawking chicken out of his arms and tossed it into the hut. The medicine man stood, stretched, and without saying another word, ducked his head and disappeared into the gloom of his mud hut. With his eyes following the medicine man, Oteka didn't notice the young wife coming up behind him. Striking like a cobra, she snatched a clump of Oteka's hair and yanked it out by the roots. Before he had time to protest, she reached down, grabbed his hand, and peeled off a bit of his nail. Oteka remained mute and unmoved. He felt no pain. The magic had started. Sit. Oteka sat. The sun was climbing in the sky, and he felt beads of sweat gather on his brow. Incense wafted out of the hut, and the rattle of the Ajah bells made the smaller gods come visit. When the sun was almost overhead, the young wife emerged from the hut and nodded. The medicine man was ready. Oteka's heart began to thump. He entered the hut. It was a dim and shadowy place. Wild animal skins lined the walls, antelope and lion, the most treasured of all, the skin of a leopard. Mats covered the dirt floor, crossed spears and drums to the left of the mat. A candle provided the only light. Sit, commanded the young wife. Cross-legged and with watering eyes, Oteka sat. His thumping heart was now pounding in his ears. His palms were wet with sweat. The medicine man, now wearing beads, skins, and gagi around his ankles and wrists, with ash and paint on his forehead and chest, began his duty. He took a sip of holy water, then spat it out. He shook the gagi to invite spirits in. The young wife lit more incense. The smoke stung Oteka's eyes. "Why have you come here?" the medicine man shouted as he rattled the shells and beads and pounded on the drum. "My mother." Oteka could barely form words. "I must speak with her." The medicine man roared and danced and called to the gods to make their presence known. And then, when he seemed depleted, he hissed to his young wife, "Bring me the chicken. The gods are being stubborn today." The young wife knelt beside the medicine man and held the chicken up to him in an offering. The medicine man grabbed the screeching chicken by the neck, then pried open its beak. "Spit in the mouth of the chicken," commanded the medicine man. Oteka did as he was told. Then the medicine man did the same. The fingernail clipping and hair the wife had taken from Oteka were mixed with herbs, and that concoction, too, was shoved down the chicken's throat. Again, the medicine man shook his beads and shells, but now he stood, and the roof of the hut seemed to rise to accommodate his height. The smoke grew thicker, encasing Oteka in a fog. It was nearly impossible for him to keep his eyes open longer than a few seconds. As the medicine man's hands reached up and up and up, his voice vibrated with the chants that rose from the rumbles to thunderclaps. The sounds engulfed, then swamped Oteka. Then, in one broad sweep, the medicine man wrenched a knife from his belt and, with a mighty swipe, he severed the chicken's head. "Ask your question." The medicine man's voice was low and gritty, like a rake being dragged over the rocky ground. "Mother," Oteka whispered, "I do not know where I am, or where I am supposed to be in this life. I wait here in the camp only for my grave. Tell me, what must I do? Please, mother, tell me." The medicine man held the chicken high and swung it by the neck, all the while howling, "Here is your boy, mother. You have heard him speak. He needs your help. He is stranded in this time, but he can escape his situation. I am a medium, and I beg you to speak to your child. Let him hear your voice. Give him a message." The howl turned into a shriek, and the candle was snuffed out. Silence. And then, Coney. The word dripped out of the medicine man's mouth like poison. In that moment, Oteka felt more alone than ever. Oteka reeled out of the medicine man's hut and staggered back across the camp. Reaching out, he took hold of a bamboo pole and tried to steady himself. He'd have retched if he had any food in his stomach. He came to the public showers, ducked his head inside, pulled down on a chain on the cistern. Out dribbled a thin stream of water warmed by the sun. Coney, the madman who stole, tortured, and murdered children. Was his mother trying to warn him? Should he run? But what if he was captured on the road? If he stayed, would he be caught in the raid? What was he to do? He wanted to cry out. If there was no escape, why torture him like this? Then, another thought, a more rational one. Did he hear right, or did he hear his own fears echoed back to him? With great effort, he walked back towards the hut, his feet dragging in the dust. What difference did it make? He could not leave Ada. There were many in camp, thousands who were starving. It's not like the old days in the villages when neighbors cared for neighbor. What little resources each had went to their own children, their own survival. If Oteka left Ada, she would surely starve. The answer was in that, to stay and fulfill his obligation to the old woman and wait for a sign. Ada. Oteka neared the old woman's hut. The kolo in front was empty. Long white tubes of cassava sat in a bowl. Oteka looked about. The camp was quiet. Small children were sleeping, men played their chess games, and the girls and women had yet to return from the gardens. Ada? Oteka pushed aside a strip of canvas that served as her door. In the dim light, he saw the fish that hung from the roof, fish he had caught and Ada had dried. He smelled beans and sesame, and then in the shadows he saw her. Oh, Ada! Oteka fell to his hands and knees and crawled, hand over hand, across the mud floor. He reached Ada's kabuto, then gathered the little old woman in his arms. She had left this world peacefully. It was the sign. And we'll stop there and do chapter 5 next time.